They walked into the mountain with hymnals and rope, and were never seen again. It was supposed to be a pilgrimage, a 40-day purification, 40 men of the cloth, ascending into the hills outside Chapel Hill, with scripture on their lips. But they left behind no footprints, no bodies, no answers. Only a chapel, half-burned and singing, and a journal too soaked in blood to read. It begins with fog, a slow rolling mist creeping through the pine-covered hills of western North Carolina. The camera holds, distant and unblinking, as a procession of black-robed figures appears like shadows at the edge of the frame. 40 men, silent, disciplined, and barefoot. Their breath fogs the morning air. Each carries nothing but a satchel, a thin bundle of rope, and a small wooden cross tied at the waist. They are priests, ordained, trained, and chosen. All 40 belong to the eastern arm of the Roman Diocese of Chapel Hill, and today, on August 3rd, 1963, they walk west into the mountains and do not return. What happened in those hills remains unconfirmed, but we do know this. A month before the pilgrimage, letters were sent, handwritten, sealed, with wax, and distributed only to selected parishes. The letter described an opportunity, a place. A chapel had been found, abandoned since the 1700s, nestled high in the Blackwood Range. The land itself had recently changed. Ownership ... purchased in silence by a defunct monastic order known as Fratris Umbri Dei, the Brothers of Gods. Shadow. No tax records exist for the transfer. No deed has ever surfaced, but something had drawn them there. The language in the letters is biblical, laced with metaphor. The tone is calm but urgent. One line repeats, 40 days in the shadow of the cross, 40 men, one voice. The priests selected were not the youngest, nor the strongest. Many were aging, close to retirement. Some had reputations for orthodoxy. Others had quietly resisted changes within the church. One had recently returned from exorcism training in Rome. None were volunteers. Each one was chosen. And in that final week before departure, the town grew quieter. Families reported strange goodbyes. Flat voices, distant stares. One wife later claimed her husband had buried his wedding ring in the backyard the night before he left. They departed at dawn. No announcement, no procession, no final benediction, just the slow climb through unmarked forest roads, headed northwest, past Chapel Hill, for a 40-day retreat that promised seclusion, discipline, purification. Like Christ's trial in the desert. But something wasn't right. The chapel itself, later identified as Capella Umbri, sits atop a ridge rarely visited by hikers. No path leads directly to it. The terrain is steep, with sheer shale, cliffs, and unnatural silence in the woods. Rangers say even birds avoid the area. The chapel was built in 1741 by early colonial Monacics. French settlers, escaping persecution. No records of its consecration exist. Locals in nearby towns refer to it simply as the Black Church. Even in broad daylight, it's hard to see. Constructed from darkened wood and local stone, the structure stands low, hunched like it's hiding. The steeple has long since collapsed. Ivy and rot cover the north wall, but what remains intact is strangely untouched. Inside, the pews are narrow and uneven, hand-carved with no tool alike. The altar is stone, cold to the touch. One side bears a worn engraving. Latin script, partially illegible. In tenebris, dies audit. In darkness, God listens. In the days following their arrival, there were no updates. No letters. No calls. Just silence. At first, it was assumed deliberate. A vow, a retreat in the purest sense. But by day 15, concern began to grow. The local bishop claimed he had authorized the mission. But when pressed, admitted the letter had not come through formal channels. When parishioners began to ask about the missing priests, no one answered. On day 21, one man returned, Brother Alphonse Moreau, He collapsed at the edge of the tree line near a logging road, covered in pine sap and blood. ... Not his own. His tongue had been crudely cut, threaded shut with rosary wire. He was barefoot, sunburned, and blind in one eye. He died within hours. No statement, no last rites. Only one thing was found clutched in his fist, a page torn from a hymnal, soaked through and pierced with 6 small holes arranged in a spiral. It was at this point that state authorities considered a search party, but when the sheriff's department arrived 3 days later, the chapel was empty, cold, silent. No fire, no beds, no signs of recent use. And yet, something had been left behind. In the nave, where the choir would stand, 40 small black robes were folded neatly in a line, each topped with a cross, each labeled by name. There were no bodies, no footprints, just the distant sound of a hymn echoing down the hill. And from that day on, no one has set foot inside Capella Umbri without hearing it. The sound of 40 voices, singing without breath. It rises out of the tree line like something left behind by time, wood blackened not by paint, but by age and exposure. Stones half sunken into moss and rot. No road leads to it. No signage marks its place. Just a clearing, oddly circular, where even the tallest pines bend outward, as if pushed away by something still breathing. They call it Capella Umbri, the Chapel of Shadow. Older locals say the name wasn't given by the church. It came from the outlet. Hills ... whispers passed from grandfather to grandson. Hunters refused to camp near it. Hikers turned back early. The land around it doesn't hold warmth, even in summer. The clearing is cool, damp, still, but something wasn't right. Long before the 40 priests arrived in 1963, the chapel already had a reputation, and not a holy one. It was built in 1741, supposedly by Trappist monks fleeing religious unrest in France. But records are vague. The founding document ... what little of it survives ... DOESN, single quotes T mention any order, bishopric, or papal recognition. Instead, it bears a single Latin line etched into the original cornerstone beneath the altar. Ante lucem, audibimus, before the light. We listen. Local folklore holds that the chapel wasn't built on virgin land, but over something much older, a stone circle, possibly indigenous, possibly colonial. No photographs survive, only a sketch from a 1912 excavation, commissioned quietly by a university researcher. The diagram shows 12 standing stones ... tall, narrow, and pointed toward the chapel's current foundation. The researcher disappeared. 2 weeks later, his notes were found burned in a riverbed 30 miles east. The chapel, meanwhile, was never officially deconsecrated. It simply faded. By 1814, there were no services. By 1850, no clergy would claim it. A few sermons were attempted during the Reconstruction era. ... But every attempt ended in silence, or something worse. Children were the first to go missing. 3 in 1898, 1 in 1907, and a final case in 1923. ... 11-year-old Eleanor Calloway, last seen walking toward the woods with her prayer book. Her brother, now elderly, recalls hearing something strange from their porch that evening, a sound he later described as singing but wrong. ... Like a choir where no one was breathing between verses. He never found her shoes, and yet, despite the warnings, despite the disappearances, the church never intervened. They distanced themselves from Capella Umbri, calling it a relic, a misattribution, not ours. But records in the Vatican's Black Registry say otherwise. In a sealed letter from 1934, a Jesuit observer notes that the structure bears signs of SYNCRETISM ... wooden beams interlocked with pagan totems, crucifixes carved with inverted iconography, and scriptural verses spliced with pre-Christian liturgies. He ends his report with a single line: whatever was worshipped here, it listened better than God. That same year, The church erased all formal mention of the chapel. Maps were updated. Land surveys were discarded. And still, the building stood. When the priests arrived in 1963, they didn't enter blind. At least 3 among them had read the archived letters. One had studied occult liturgy in Lyon. Another had been part of a Vatican exorcism team in southern Brazil. They knew what Capella Umbri was, and they believed they could purify it. The plan, as pieced together from journals and private correspondence, was to reclaim the chapel, not with fire or destruction, but with presence. Daily Mass. 40 voices in unison. A holy incursion. Each priest would take a section of the structure. Walls, floorboards, altar. And recite scripture until the fabric of the place shifted, until the silence broke. But the silence didn't break. It deepened. Within the first week, villagers down the mountain began reporting odd echoes. Gregorian chants heard from miles away, often during daylight hours. But the voices were indistinct, layered, wrong. It sounded like multiple verses being sung simultaneously. Each out of time, each in a different key, like the words were being dragged backwards. Then came the symbols, painted in ash on the trunks of pine trees. Circles, spirals, and crucifixes. Not upright, not inverted, but turned sideways, tilted, like something had tried to mimic a holy mark and failed, and the forest began to shift. Paths that once led toward the chapel began to bend. Compasses spun. Hounds refused to enter the clearing, and one night, a park ranger stationed 2 miles from the site reported seeing candlelight move through the trees, like a procession, but without footsteps. No one believed him, not at first, but 3 days later, he was found in his cabin, eyes open, mouth full of ash. No fire had occurred. Back at the chapel, the priests pressed on. At least, that's what we assume. No journals have surfaced from that second week. No voice recordings. Only a short, handwritten page found decades later, folded inside a hymnal. The words bounce. They do not stick. The wood does not remember us. It was built to hold something else. And beneath that, we speak to the walls, but the walls do not care. Survivors, if any exist, have never come forward, but there are rumors. A woman in Asheville claimed to have seen one of the priests in 1975, older, silent, pacing the edge of a chapel before dawn. She asked if he needed help. He did not answer, just turned and walked into the trees. And that was the last time Capella Umbri was spoken of aloud, until the candles came back. The fog never left the trees. Even by the 3rd week, the clearing remained damp and pale, like the light itself was being thinned. The forest pressed closer now, branches touching the outer walls. The path leading up to the chapel had grown darker, narrower. Still, there had been no word. No letters, no telegrams, no whispered updates passed down the mountain trail. 40 days. Not a single voice came down from Capella Umbre. Not prayer. Not one cry. The diocese remained quiet. Few parishioners wrote concerned letters. One woman asked if her husband had received the care package she sent. Dry bread, hand-stitched linens, a pocket Bible with pressed violets. She never got an answer. She died of pneumonia before the year was out. Others tried telegrams, radios, even hiked the lower trails to listen for signs of life. But the woods absorbed sound like a sponge. The closer one got to the chapel, the less the air responded. No echoes, no birdsong. Just silence, and something else. A low tone beneath hearing. Not a hum exactly, but a resonance. A pressure at the base of the skull, like something behind the trees was vibrating through the marrow. But there was one exception. A single recording. Found years later, unlabeled, stored in a decaying archive box at the Chapel Hill Rectory. The tape itself was warped, a magnetic reel degraded by heat or time. but the handwriting on the case was still legible. Beckett, last homily. Do not copy. The voice on the tape is faint, strained, as though recorded from a great distance or filtered through a cloth. It's difficult to confirm the speaker, ... but surviving clergy agree. It sounds like Father Elias Beckett. He begins with prayer, halting, breathy, uncertain ... then a pause, a long one, and then, we misjudged the silence. It is not empty. It is not dead. There is choir here, but no flesh left to sing, and still it sings. The sermon lasts 4 minutes and 16 seconds. There are no names mentioned, no dates, but in the final moments, Beckett speaks more clearly, ... almost with conviction. The bones return. They do not belong to us. We are the last obstruction. After 40 days, the breath will leave, and then the sound cuts out ... not a fade, not static, ... just absence, ... as if the tape itself remembered something it wasn't meant to. The diocese reviewed the reel in 1965. They issued a single-page memo to Vatican advisors. The message was simple. Beckett's sermon is speculative and metaphysical metaphor, possibly the result of fasting psychosis or spiritual fervor. No further inquiry required. But something wasn't right, ... because months before that reel surfaced, an unnamed bishop from the regional council had already redacted all information about Beckett. His seminary records, ... his ordination, his letters, ... gone, ... the only photo that remains is a faded group shot ... 40 priests gathered beneath the tree line. In the front row, a tall man stands slightly apart from the others. His face is turned toward the chapel. His hands are clasped over his ears. We don't know what he heard, but by the 3rd week of their retreat, other signs had started to emerge. Mountain itself began to change. Locals swore the tree lines were shifting. A hiker's cairn ... set 2 miles from the chapel ... was found 20 feet west of its last confirmed location. Nearby rocks bore scratch marks, not clawed, but etched, carved in straight lines. Repeated patterns. 4 lines down, 1 across, again and again, like someone trying to mark days. In a place without clocks, a former forestry technician, who declined to be named, recalls seeing something near the old eastern ridge around that time. He'd been monitoring rainfall. Normal route. Nothing unusual. Until he stepped through a break in the canopy and saw the chapel. But not as it had been. Not covered in vines. Not sunken or forgotten. Clean. Intact. Candles in the windows. In something standing at the threshold, wearing robes darker than the wood behind it. He called out, and that's when he heard it. A voice. Low, slow, not hostile, but wrong. It didn't echo. It didn't pause. It just spoke. You are already singing. The technician left the job too. Days later, he would not speak again about what he saw. Others began to feel it too. Children complained of ringing in their ears when passing near the base of the mountain. Dogs refused to climb certain trails. Rangers found deer tracks circling the chapel in spirals, deeper and deeper, as if walking in sleep. Still, the diocese sent no one. No second team. No message. Only silence. And in that silence, something began to settle. In the town, in the parishes, in the air, a dread that didn't spike, but sat. Like the moment before a bell tolls. One local priest. Father Jim Dorrance. Described it best in a letter never meant for public release. It's as if the world knows 40 prayers are missing, like a voice stopped mid-word, a chorus caught in the throat, and whatever was listening is still waiting for the rest. The letter was postmarked on the 39th day. On the 40th, no one spoke. There was no announcement. No candle lighting. No morning rite. Only the slow descent of ash across the pines that morning. Despite no fires in the region. And one final anonymous note left in the mailbox of the Chapel Hill Cathedral. Typed. No signature. They sang through the walls. And now, the walls remember. The morning fog hung low over the tree line. pale and sluggish. Like breath caught beneath glass dot below the ridge, the trees whispered with a wind that didn't stir the leaves. A single road twisted through the lower pines darly, a path grav, crooked and slick with dew. That's where they found him crawling barefoot face down in the mud at first. The rangers thought he was a lost hiker, just another man going too deep, too far off the trail. But as they stepped closer, they saw the cloth black, thin, torn at the hem, not modern, handmade, monastic and around his waist. A simple rope belt, stained red Brother Alphonse Moreau, 39, years old, ordained in 1951, born in Marseille, transferred to the Chapel Hill Diocese in late 1962. No history of illness. No known family. He had vanished with the other priests nearly 3 weeks earlier. But now he was here, emaciated, sunburned, knees scraped raw from crawling. His hands shook when they lifted him, grasping wildly at the dirt, as if afraid it might vanish. And then they saw his mouth, sewn shut. 8 loops of rosary wire pierced through the skin, pulling lips closed in uneven knots. Crude, angry. Some threads had torn through. Blood had dried in long streaks down his chin and neck, but something wasn't right. He had done it himself. That was the coroner's first assessment. No bruising on the face, no signs of restraint. The loops were spaced as if guided by a mirror. One hand steadying, the other threading, and inside his mouth, beneath the tongue, 3 small stones had been placed, perfectly round, each etched with a line, one vertical, one diagonal, one spiral. He lived for 11 hours, never regained speech, never slept. When they tried to feed him, he clawed at his own throat. When they offered a notepad, he tore it apart, scribbling only one word before collapsing. Listen. He died that night at 2:44 a.m. in a locked recovery room at St. Augustine's Infirmary. Nurses claimed he turned his head toward the window. Just before the monitors went flat, there was no window in the room. And that's when the humming started. Low, dull, a metallic resonance heard through the hospital floor. So subtle, it felt imagined. Like standing near old power lines. Like breath caught in wires. Some called it tinnitus. Others called it grief. But no one slept that night. They buried him on church grounds 2 days later. No family came forward. No ceremony was held. Only a few lines were entered into the diocesan ledger. Deceased, Moreau, a cause undetermined. Recovered from Capella Umbri perimeter. Unfit for record. But others noticed the change. In the days after Brother Alphonse's death, mail clerks in the rectory reported dozens of returned letters. Parish communications sent weeks earlier to the other priests. Each envelope stamped the same, undeliverable. Addressee no longer exists. Not missing, not gone. No longer exists. A quiet unease began to settle. Some in the church insisted Alphonse had simply broken under the pressure. Fasting-induced psychosis, isolation trauma, an unfortunate case of religious obsession. But not everyone believed that. Not after what the nurse saw. A week after the burial, a night orderly at St. Augustine's filed a report. Unpublished, sealed, and forgotten. He claimed he had gone into the mortuary to retrieve linens and heard something strange. Faint, barely audible from inside the storage unit. Voice. Hollow. Musical. Like humming from deep underwater. He opened the drawer. Brother Alphonse's body was still, but the hum had stopped. And when he stepped back, the lights above flickered. Not all at once, but in sequence, left to right, like a pulse running along the hallway spine. He never returned to work. And no autopsy was ever performed. The report lists internal trauma, self-inflicted. But when the chaplain requested the body be exhumed for further study, he was told the grave was empty. The headstone remains, but beneath it, nothing. Just a void. Just soil. Nothing to remember. And yet, His name has since appeared elsewhere, not in records, not in files, but whispered, spoken, by children in the parish choir, humming his melody without knowing the tune, by hikers who claimed to hear faint chanting from the hills near Capella, UMBRA, by one woman, who, in her sleep, repeated a single phrase over and over, though she had never met him. The skin is hollow, but still it sings. The church has issued no statement. The tapes from his final hours were erased, but in the margins of a seminary manual found in his quarters, scrawled in pencil, was a final note, barely legible, words pressed into the paper as if written in a tremor. It was not death. It was something after, and the page beneath it was torn away. It was the sound that led them in, a soft rising hymn, somewhere between human and wind. No words, just shape and motion, echoing down the valley like a memory you didn't know you had. Rescue Team 2 had reached the halfway marker by dusk. They weren't priests, not officials, just hired forest contractors and a single sheriff's deputy. The official reason for the mission was ecclesiastical welfare check, but the men knew what they were walking into. 3 weeks, no contact, one corpse, and a chapel that no longer appeared on government maps. They moved quietly, slowly. Radios stayed off. They hadn't brought a priest with them. The local diocese had declined to participate. One man, Deputy Harris, had grown up nearby. He asked not to be put on the team. He said he'd seen the chapel once as a child, only once. The approach was steep, trees more closely packed than any remembered. Shadows moved differently here, longer, slower, like film through wet reels. When they reached the clearing, night had already begun to fall, but the hymn was still there, fainter now, drifting, not coming from the chapel itself, but around it, like the sound was circling. And that's when they saw the building, Capella Umbri, stood as expected, low, crooked, dark against the tree line. But the door was open, not ajar, not cracked, open, like it had been waiting. They entered in pairs, flashlights only, no one spoke. Inside, the chapel was wrong, not destroyed, not vandalized, just stripped. The pews were gone, removed entirely. The iron sconces that once held candles, gone. Even the wall-mounted crucifix had vanished, leaving only the imprint of aged wood and 4 nail holes. The altar was smashed, cracked down the center, its foundation, stones displaced and blackened, as if scorched, but there were no burn marks on the floor, no soot, no ash, just a low radiating heat, like sun-warmed concrete. One man touched it. He jerked his hand back, immediately said it felt like breath, and something wasn't right. The walls, bare, quiet, gave off a strange acoustics. Sound didn't land correctly. Words came back twisted, muffled, as if the air remembered a different tongue. Deputy Harris turned toward the stairs. He had noticed something else. Draft, but not cold, warm. Try, coming from below. They descended together, 4 steps at a time. No one spoke. The crypt was below the main floor, half carved into the hillside, half built with local stone. Records claimed it had once been a minor ossuary for the earliest colonial monks. What they found wasn't an ossuary, not anymore. The walls were scraped, clean, no shelves, no sealed alcoves, just the bones, laid out on the floor in a vast spiral, stretching from the farthest corner to the center of the chamber. Femurs, tibias, ribs, vertebrae, arranged precisely, almost reverently, and at the spiral's core, 40 skulls, stacked in a cone, no names, no cloth, no rot, just bone, all facing inward, and the floor beneath them was warm, hot, even, enough that the men began to sweat beneath their jackets. No flame, no light, just heat, radiating upward in slow pulses, like something breathing beneath stone. They stood frozen for nearly a minute before anyone moved, and then one of the contractors, a man named Langley, reached down to touch the edge of the spiral. Not the skulls. Just the outer rim. Just bone. When his hand got within 6 inches, the hymn stopped. All at once, silence dropped over the room, like a lig. And then a crack. Not loud. Sharp. Clang. The center skull had split open. Not shattered. Not crushed. Just split. A thin, perfect fracture down the forehead, as if something inside had pressed too long, too hard, and finally gave way. Langley stepped back, the others stared, and then came the smell. Not rot. Not sulfur. But linen. Warm. Pressed cloth. Altar vestments pulled, fresh from a drawer. The scent lingered. One man began to weep. Uncontrollably. He couldn't explain why. Said he wasn't sad. Just remembered something he'd never been told. They called in backup that night. 2 more deputies and a state forensic consultant arrived by morning. The bones were tagged, photographed, but within 72 hours, they vanished. Every piece. Gone. Crypt empty. No signs of removal. No prints. No boot scuffs. Just dust on the floor. And faint impressions where the spiral had been, like a memory half erased. The photographs were kept in diocesan records for a time, but years later, when re-examined, the images had changed. They showed the spiral, but not bones. Just ropes, knotted, frayed, tied at the ends. As if something had once been bound there and had slipped free. The rescue team never returned to the chapel. Langley left the state. Deputy Harris retired. One contractor. 9 withheld. Entered monastic seclusion within the year. He never spoke publicly, but in his final letter to a friend, he wrote one line. They had no tongues, but still they sang. And across town, in the basement of a schoolhouse chapel, the children's choir began humming a new melody. No one taught it to them. It has no name, but it ends on a note that bends slightly downward. The ink had faded, brown to the color of dried leaves, soaked deep into old vellum. The handwriting. Tight, deliberate. Slanted slightly upward, as if the author had rushed the final lines. The page smelled of wax and dust and something else, like stone left too long underground. The letter was discovered in a climate-controlled drawer at the Diocese of Raleigh, misfiled in a section labeled Heretical Correspondence. Suppressed. Dated November 6, 1891. Its origin. A Benedictine archivist named Father Wilmer Hart, a man of no known controversy, no excommunications, no recorded infractions. Just one letter. To no one, addressed simply to those who will enter after we fail. They contents were never published. Until now. Opens plainly. Account of missing brethren. 8 monks, all ordained, dispatched to restore an abandoned monastic site near the Appalachians. They were last seen entering the woods in early October of that year. Hart had remained at the base, camp. Too ill to ascend. He describes hearing music 2 nights. Later. Not voices. Not bells, but intervals, harmonics without melody, as if someone were tuning an instrument no longer made. The sound drifted down the slope, soft, too precise to be wind, too structured to be natural. By morning, the forest had changed. The trail markers were gone, not broken, just missing. The trees, where they once hung, now stood smooth and bare, and beneath them, the earth had shifted, not in upheaval, but in direction. Roots now curled inward, toward a central point, like they were listening. Hart attempted the ascent twice, failed both times. His compass spun, his map tore. He began to sleep in short bursts, and that's when the dreams began. The letter describes them carefully. Not madness. Not nightmare, but remembered memory. He dreamed of a chapel, not yet built, of monks he had never met. Of prayers sung backward, syllable by syllable, until meaning inverted into silence. And then a voice. Soft, calm female, you are heard. He awoke weeping, and then he writes. The letters began to arrive, folded into books, tucked inside walls, carried by wind and rain. Each addressed the same, to the heretic, and each written in the same hand as his own, but he had no memory of writing them. Their messages varied. One described the correct orientation for a spiral OSSUARY. Another warned not to speak when beneath the altar. A third simply repeated a phrase. It listens, but not as we do. And that's when he heard it. Not in dreams, not in mind, but in the stone beneath his bed frame. A vibration. Slow, repeating, rhythmic, like distant footsteps on ancient stairs. He fled the site on the 24th day, returned to the diocese, filed his letter, and was never heard from again. No grave, no death record, no disciplinary action. He vanished as cleanly as those before him. And yet, one detail remained, written in trembling script at the bottom of the final page. It is not death that waits below the chapel, but a God who listens backwards. The Vatican did not respond to inquiries regarding Father Hart's letter, but internal communication between church officials. Leaked in 1981. Reference a location designated Domum non auditus, the house that does not hear. Others believe it's a mistranslation, not that it does not hear, but that it does not hear forward. Audio analysis of recent field recordings near Capella Umbrii show reversed wavelengths. Waves that cannot be naturally produced by wind, voice, or machine. When played backward, the waveform resembles Gregorian chant. One line repeats, Dominus audit, the Lord hears, but the tone is wrong. Minor key, dissonant cadence, like a mass sung by mouths unfamiliar with sound. Liturgy read in absence. There is a growing theory among certain fringe theologians. Scholars once excommunicated, now quietly tolerated. The chapel was not built on sacred ground. It was built on a point of acoustic inversion, a place where prayers collapse inward, where speech is consumed, where sound returns, altered. Where God. If that word still applies. Listens from the other side of meaning. And in that listening, memory corrodes, not just personal memory, but sacred memory. Liturgical. Canonical. Dogmatic. What begins as worship becomes. Translation. And translation here distorts truth. A priest says, deliver us from evil. But in the spiral below, it returns as, welcome us to absence. An amen becomes an omen. A psalm becomes signal. The church has no doctrine for this. No right. No defense. And yet, the letter from 1891 ends with a chilling acknowledgement. We were not the first to fail. We will not be the last. Do not ring the bell. There is no bell tower at Capella Umbrii. There never was. But several witnesses claim to have heard one. Always at dusk. Always once. And always followed by silence. Not quiet. Silence. The kind that removes thought, erases sound. A void left behind by something that finished listening and turned to speak. And whatever it spoke, it is still echoing. The hallways inside the Vatican Apostolic Archives are silent. Even in daylight, they feel subterranean. Vaulted ceilings, wrapped in shadow, air thick with history and heat. A floor is polished stone, cold to the touch. Lights flicker gently, humming in intervals too faint to count. 3 weeks after the incident at Chapel Hill, a request is logged into the ecclesiastical record system. It contains no subject line, just one phrase, repeated 4 times. Capella Umbrii, Capella Umbrii, Capella Umbrii, Capella Umbrii. Within hours, access to all diocesan files linked to the chapel is restricted. Within days, those files no longer exist. Not archived, not sealed, erased. Parish maps are recalled. Internal directories are revised. Even handwritten ledgers show signs of deliberate Ink dash lifting chemical scrubbing visible under magnification. One page, recovered from a forgotten auxiliary parish, shows the word Umbri partially burned through, as if the paper itself refused to hold the name. But something wasn't right, because the blackout didn't start from Chapel Hill. It started in Rome. Bishop Thomas Callahan, an auxiliary, investigator assigned to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, had arrived at the chapel site 2 weeks prior. No press, no escort, no announcement. He entered the forest alone. He left. Different reports suggest he returned to the diocesan rectory in full clerical dress, but barefoot, his skin pale, his eyes unfocused. When asked what he saw, he replied only once, "It listens, and it sings back." That was the last verifiable statement he ever made. 3 days later, he resigned. The Vatican accepted without comment. His residence was vacated within the week. No forwarding address, no funeral notice, no trace. He was never seen again. And yet, on. The morning of his disappearance, the cathedral bell tower rang 13 times. Not an unusual number, until you remember the tower was undergoing restoration. The bell had been removed months earlier, and still, they heard it. Not from above, from below. The Vatican issued no formal statement, but quietly, an order was drafted. Circulated only among the College of Cardinals and the archivists of the CURI. It reads, "Let no light fall upon the place. Let no pilgrim seek its stones. Let no record remain. Its silence is the Lord's." Beneath that, a final line. Handwritten, unsigned, "Do not return. The interval has begun." What interval refers to is unknown, but shortly after, a string of unusual absences begins to ripple outward. First, among diocesan clerks, those who handle chapel records, then archivists, then translators, men and women with no known illnesses. Vanished. One is found days later in a small town outside Palermo, standing at a dry fountain, unshaven, eyes closed, hands covered in wax. When asked what he was doing, he whispered, "It's still echoing." He did not recover. Others sent letters. One, addressed to the prefect of the archives, contained only a single word repeated 144 times, "reverse." Another was found sitting motionless in a basilica pew at dawn. He had sewn his ears shut with thread from his vestments. Below his seat, a page torn from the Book of Psalms. Every verse written backwards. There was no official cause of death. Just withdrawal. Absence. Dissolution. As if something once present in them had been called back to where it came from. And still, the silence spread. Satellite imagery taken of the Chapel Hill region shows subtle but consistent distortions over the site. Where Capella Umbri stood, light bends, shadows elongate. Wildlife avoids the area. No rescue teams return. No clergy are dispatched. Even GPS routes redirect elsewhere, looping endlessly until signal drops. And still, there are sounds. Recordings from amateur hikers, filtered through spectrograms, reveal something faint. A pitch consistent with human voice. But flattened, drawn long, smeared across frequency bands like paint in water. When processed, it reveals a simple phrase, "Come inside." Analysts dismissed the recordings as corrupted, but some noticed a pattern in the spectrogram itself. A spiral. Repeating. Tightening. Descending. Bishop Callahan's name is no longer listed in the Vatican directory. His seminary records are sealed. His sermons. Once published widely. Have been replaced with placeholder entries. But one entry remains. Undated. A scanned margin note from a lecture on sacred space, scrawled in shaky. PENMANSHIP. Almost an afterthought. There is a kind of prayer that opens the mouth of silence, but the mouth does not close again. The Vatican has offered no clarification. But in the weeks following, a quiet directive reaches seminaries worldwide. The phrase appears at the bottom of a circular memo regarding pastoral care in rural parishes. It reads, "Do not enter chapels left vacant more than 30 days." No explanation. No reason given. Just that sentence. Plain. An absolute. As if the church itself had once listened and now knew better. The trees had already begun to turn, their edges crisping into early amber, breathing in the last warmth of September. The trail leading toward the ruins was nearly erased. Swallowed by underbrush, softened by decades of neglect. No signs, no markers, just a narrow line in the earth, like a scar. On the morning of October 3rd, 1987, a sound technician named Emil Vargo was dispatched to survey environmental noise levels in the surrounding forest reserve. He was not part of any official investigation. Just a contractor, tasked with tracking migratory bird patterns for a university research grant. He brought with him a handheld Tascam cassette recorder, fitted with a shotgun mic and windscreen. He wore headphones. And around 6:12 a.m., just after setting up near a broken tree line that bordered the southern rim of the Capella Umbri ruins, he heard it. Low at first. Chorus. Voices. Male. Many. Singing. He assumed it was an old recording from a passing vehicle, or maybe echo from a distant monastery. But as he listened, it grew clearer. Too close. Too present. He crouched, pressed the headphones tighter, then froze. It wasn't a song. It was liturgy. Spoken Latin, dozens of voices overlapping. Some shouted, some whispered, all reciting the same thing. Colon prayers. Scripture. But wrong. Backward. Not in accent or dialect. But in order. As if the breath had been pulled in reverse. Yet the meaning still bled through. The chant continued for 72 seconds. Then stopped. Instantly. As if someone had cut a wire. Vargo stood motionless. The air was still. The forest held its breath. When he played the tape back later that evening, the chant was intact, but something wasn't right. There was no ambient noise beneath the recording. No wind. No birds. No footsteps. No mic hum. Just the voice. And as he listened again, he noticed something else. A thread beneath the chant. One voice. Distinct. Louder. Repeating what sounded like all four gospels simultaneously. Layered over themselves, without pause, without confusion. As if one mouth were speaking them all at once. Matthew. Mark. Luke. John. All spoken in reverse cadence. And yet, every syllable enunciated with precision. It wasn't static. It wasn't artifact. It was intentional. Vargo brought the tape to a university audio lab. 3 engineers reviewed it. They isolated the voice, cleaned the background. One technician. And Lestro. Ran the voice through spectral phase mapping, and what appeared shocked them. The waveform folded, not arched, not curved. Folded. Twice over itself, like a mirrored scroll. The engineers claimed they had never seen anything like it. One asked if it had been passed through a multi-layered reverb chamber. Another suggested the voice had been digitally synthesized, although the recording was analog. And then they noticed the phrasing, though reversed. The Latin still maintained internal structure. Certain verses seemed pulled from traditional benedictions. Others were not in any scripture, phrases that matched no recorded Catholic liturgy. Lines like, "The tongue devours the soul when sung against the grain. No flesh may echo what God once whispered into stone. The sermon burns upward." Vargo reported the findings. No official response came. But 3 weeks later, his lab was raided. Not by law enforcement. By clergy, black-suited, collarless, bearing a sealed directive from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The original tape was taken. So were all backups. Lestro's audio files were purged. All equipment was decommissioned. The university never released a statement. And yet, copies had been made. Vargo had mailed 2 early dubs to former professors in Montreal and Cologne. One of those dubs resurfaced in 1992, in the hands of a private archivist named Father Lorenzo Marchesi. He played it once and never spoke again. When interviewed 5 years later, he communicated only through written notes. Each note consisted of single words, all nouns, never verbs. One reads simply, collapse, another, litany, a third, Callahan. That name, Callahan, was familiar to only a few, but those who remembered him recalled one specific phrase from his final investigation report before he vanished. It listens, and it sings back. By the late 1990s, only fragments of the recording remained in circulation. Most degraded, warped from duplication. But the core elements persisted: the reversed prayers, the overlapping gospels, the folding voice, and underneath it all, something deeper, a breath, not human, not machine, a rhythmic swell behind the voice, as if the chapel itself were exhaling the litany through its stone. Audio analysis revealed that the breath matched no known respiratory pattern. It spiked in decibels, not when the voice grew louder, but when it grew still. As if the silence between prayers was what nourished it. And then came the final phrase, only audible at 80% playback speed, buried beneath the rest. A whisper, not Latin, but Aramaic. One line, I do not forgive. The Vatican made no comment. But a memo circulated among high seminary institutions warned against field recording near monastic ruins. The stated reason, spiritual contamination risk. No further details given. Vargo disappeared in 1999. His cabin was found vacant. No signs of struggle, only his cassette player, still running. The tape inside had been split at the center. A clean teared outside a reed, Gloria in excelsis Deo. Side B was blank. Except for a single vocal fragment at the very end. 3 seconds. Long. Not a chant, not a scream. A child's voice saying, we sang until our names forgot us. And then ... silence. The path leading to the ruins is never the same. Each year, the undergrowth shifts. Ferns reappearing where none grew before. Trees leaning at angles that seem wrong only when you try to walk between them. Some hikers say the forest turns them around. Others claim the wind there doesn't make sound. And yet, every year, the candles appear, 40 of them, placed in a perfect arc just outside what once was the foundation of Capella Umbri. No containers, no stands. Each candle jammed into the soil as if pressed by a deliberate, practiced hand. No matches found, no footprints leading in, and somehow always lit, even in rain, even in wind, even in snow. The first appearance was reported in 1964, 1 year to the day after the 40 priests vanished. A forest surveyor named Patrick Glenn saw the glow from a distant ridge, thought it was a fire. He called the ranger station, but by the time they arrived, the light had faded. He went back alone. Found wax stubs in the dirt. All in a line, all still, warm. And in one ... pressed near the wit ... a name, Beckett, not carved. Melted. As if the candle had formed around the name like skin. The next year, they returned, 40 again, names on each, matching the official roster from Chapel Hill's diocese. Father Beckett. Brother Alphonse. Padre Martin Reyes. All 40. Every Lent. Always on the 40th day. Locals called it the Litany Vigil. Some came to watch, others to pray, but most just stared, unable to speak, as the candles flickered unnaturally slow. Like the flame itself resisted time. No one saw them placed. No one admitted to lighting them. They would just be there, already lit, already burning. And then, as dusk faded, gone. No smoke, no scent. Just warm indentations in the earth, where wax had been. But something wasn't right, because every year, they appeared closer. Inches at first. Then feet. Then meters. Until they stood just outside what had been the chapel's threshold, pressed right against the stone perimeter, circling the ruin like mourners in vigil. and always. 40. Never one more. Never one less. Until year 40-1. In 2004. The vigil fell on March 25th. A theology student named Marissa Eldridge traveled with her professor to document the tradition. They arrived at sunrise. 39 candles already lit. The 40th ignited. As she stepped into the clearing, she heard nothing, felt nothing. Only heat, not from the flames, but from the space between them. And then, on the farthest candle, separated slightly from the ark, tilted toward the chapel. She saw it. A 41st name, different wax. PALERYELLOWED. Still warm. Eldridge. She ran, returned days later with church officials, but the candles were gone. No evidence remained except her recording. Short audio clip, crackling flame. A voice. Her own. Whispering in confusion. And beneath it, layered faintly, the low hum of chant. Not melody. Not rhythm. Just words. Fractured, half swallowed, repeating a phrase no one could translate directly, only approximated. Those who are named must return. She never visited again. Later that year, her professor suffered a breakdown, claimed the wax had burned his fingertips. But there were no burns. He left the seminary 6 months later. His final lecture notes, scribbled hastily, end with one sentence. We thought they were candles. But what if they are mouths? The church has never acknowledged the vigil, but internal documents show a shift in Lent travel policies following 2004. Seminarians are quietly advised not to enter wooded areas alone during the final 10 days of Lent. A precaution. Nothing more. And yet, in 2008, a park ranger found 41 impressions in the soil near the ruins. No candles. Just shallow, circular indentations. Still warm. And at their center, a footprint. Bare. Small. Facing inward. No one claimed it. And that's when he heard it. Flake of wax cracking beneath his boot. The air holding stillness like a mouth unspoken. And a faint smell. Burnt oil. And something sweeter. Like incense. Like sweat. He turned to leave, but the wind didn't follow. It stayed behind. Circling something just beyond sight. Something listening. That year, no candles were reported. No names appeared. No watchers came. But months later, a candle surfaced in a church basement in Lyon, melted into the top step. The name on its side, Callahan. It hadn't burned. It hadn't melted. It had formed. And in its center, a wickless hole. Not for lighting, but for hearing. The land is flat now, poured smooth in gray concrete. A blank plain where there once stood pine, stone, and shadow. No markers. No plaques. Just a stretch of cold surface that refuses to crack. The coordinates still exist, but the map, no. Longer names than. In 1992, a federal order. Undisclosed, unsigned. Authorized the land around Chapel Hill to be permanently sealed. Official reason, subsurface instability. Unofficially, no reason was given. Within weeks, trucks arrived. Industrial crews worked under silence orders, clearing brush, laying rebar, leveling the earth in tight geometric grids. No. One local was hired. The workers came from out of state. Never in uniform. Never. In pairs. Always alone. One operator, who requested anonymity, later recalled the first morning on site. He said the soil was unusually soft, damp in places where it hadn't rained. They kept hitting stone. Old, embedded blocks, not part of any known structure. Some carved, some etched. One bore a shape that resembled a mouth, not sculpted, just shaped. And beneath that stone, something hollow, a cavity, too wide for root. Too round for pipe. They were told to pour over it anyway, and they did. 6 feet thick, steel reinforced, cured under sodium. Lamps until the ground held no color. The job took 22 days, but the sound started on day 4. Humming dot low dot faint dot like a wind passing through an unseen throat. They checked the equipment dot nothing dot. They chalked it up to acoustic distortion, but it didn't. Stop dot grew dot soft, at first dot dot, just a single note, steady, repeating every 40 seconds. Then keys, not like machines, like an organ dot playing dot from beneath dot, always the same three. N-O-T-E-S-C-E-G major. Simple, bright, but wrong dot, too slow dot, too strained dot, as if someone were pressing down with enormous effort, or as if the pipes were full of water. One engineer called it a phantom tone. He later suffered partial hearing loss dot, not from volume dot, from pitch dot. His report claimed that the note entered my ear and stayed there, but something wasn't right, because the tone continued even after the concrete had set. There was nothing beneath them dot, no chamber dot, no power dot, no instrument. And yet, at night, when the crew took shifts sleeping in their trailers, they heard it again. Only this time, it wasn't music dot, it was pacing. Slow, deliberate steps dot, measured dot, echoing from below the sealed pad dot, 1, 2 dot, pause dot, 1, 2 dot, as if someone walked the perimeter over and over. Barefoot dot, security was increased dot, motion sensors installed. Thermal scans ordered dot, no anomalies reported, but the pacing returned dot, always at 3:09 a.m. Always circling clockwise dot, one worker reported a vibration near the center dot when he pressed his ear to the concrete. He didn't hear footsteps. He heard breathing, and then a whisper dot, faint dot, monotone dot, repeating just one line. We are the choir now. He left the site the next morning, didn't collect his final check, didn't speak to anyone on the crew again. The final week of work was conducted in silence dot, no radios dot, no talk dot, just steel, concrete, and tension. The day the final slab was poured, the sky shifted dot, not in color dot dot, but in sound. Birds fell quiet. The wind moved sideways dot, and the last trowel pass left a single curve dot dot, unintentional, but visible dot dot dot, like a spiral traced from the center outward. They let it dry dot, did not correct it, did not speak of it. The site was marked complete on June 6, 1992, but records show one final visit from a man who signed in as Father O. No other name dot, no affiliation dot. He arrived alone, walked the full perimeter dot, then stood at the spiral center for 46 minutes without moving. When he left, he handed the foreman a cassette tape dot, no label dot, no case, just a single side marked in pen, not a hymn. The tape was later played in a controlled setting dot, at first nothing dot, white noise dot, then dot dot dot, faint chanting dot, reversed dot, not Latin dot, not language dot, just shape, then silence, then footsteps dot, one pair, then another dot, then dozens, all pacing, not in rhythm dot, in resistance, like they were walking against something. And finally, a voice dot, genderless dot, age unknown dot, saying, we are not waiting to be found, we are waiting to be remembered. The tape ends there dot, no confirmation was ever issued dot, no follow-up. Crew returned. The site remains sealed dot, satellite images show no degradation dot, no vegetation breach, but infrared scans show subtle heat signatures in the spiral dot, always in motion, always just below the surface. The church has never claimed the land. The federal government maintains it as ecologically inactive, but a maintenance drone deployed in 2011 to survey for cracks picked up ambient audio while hovering 6 feet above the center. The drone malfunctioned shortly after, but not before transmitting one last sound. Choir, 40 voices dot, no words, just a low, continuous tone, and beneath it, a breath dot, rhythmic dot, human dot, but multiplied, layered like lungs stacked in unison. Exhaling as one dot, the engineers cleaned the feed, boosted, gain, ran the breath through phase inversion, and when they played it back, they heard a whisper dot, direct dot, intentional dot, frightened, not angry, just sure. We are the choir now. And then Silence. They weren't taken. They joined something. 40 men who gave up speech, body, and time to become liturgy itself. We are told to follow the voice of the church. But what if that voice isn't speaking to God anymore?